Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of the videos I'm making about rethinking how I program the X-touch. My rethinking is prompted by the fact I bought the Honeycomb Throttle quadrant, but the techniques I'm doing here doesn't even really rely on you having an X-touch. It's still worth seeing the technique, but it's really about the X-touch. But it was prompted by having the Honeycomb, particularly the throttle quadrant, which has got a lot of functions on which I had previously put on the X-touch. So I did a whole video about a method to make that work using the built-in layers feature of X's and O's. And this one is going to show a different way of doing that. The X's and O's it's okay, it works. But I've got another way of doing it, and I don't know which way I like best yet. But I'll show you both methods. If you haven't seen the part 1, you really ought to. So I'm going to put a link in the description below, and hopefully about now a card should appear at the top, a little clicker thing that you can click on and go and have a look at part 1. So I'm not going to go into the X-touch itself and explain how it works. Or how I did it. You need to look back at that video if you need to see that. What I'm going to talk about now is where I left it and how I'm going to change things. So this is where I left my layout for my X-touch, and I had MHz and KHz on the same rotary without using the layers function of the actual hardware. I'm using the layers function in the software, and the disadvantage of that is when I change from layer 1 to layer 2, not only does this swap from megahertz to kilohertz, so does that, and this will change to the inner ring, and that will change to the inner ring. So you may change something that you didn't really want to change, or you left it in a mode you didn't mean to leave it in. So what I want to do is to have it so I can individually change each of these for each of these, I suppose you call them channels. Also, I didn't really like having the 1-2 swap on the buttons. It emulates what happens in the actual G1000 unit, but it's not handy to have to take your hand away, go and press another button and come back again. I want to put the swap between megahertz and kilohertz on the push button here, and because I don't swap between 1 and 2 very often, I can drop that and put it down on a button down here. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to swap the position and change that into a megahertz kilohertz toggle for this channel only. Do the same with this one and bring that here. There wasn't anything on this button before because I said this globally changed it. I'm going to need an individual one for each of the channels. Still need the swap between standby and active. That's got to stay there. And I'm going to move these over here because I can't use these buttons here. I still need to put a push switch on the end of that, as well as the ability here to switch between outer and inner. So I need some space on the buttons. So let's shift that lot over there, bring this over here. And so I'm going to do a bit of fiddling here with this lot. Now, the back course bit, I'm pretty sure is going to be available from the Honeycomb throttle quadrant. It's got reverse run on it, so I'm pretty sure that that's emulated. So I'm going to take that off. And these two are definitely in the autopilot and definitely not on the Honeycomb quadrant. So I need to keep those. So I'll bring those down here. And then you've got these two kind of cheats, shortcuts I was talking about. So I can put those over here, which means that I can now have the inner outer swap on those buttons here and the push switch effect on there like that. So that's what I'm going to aim for. In fact, if I put, if I do need to put the back course in, I'll put that there and I'll lose that one there. So that's sort of where I'm leaving that at the moment. I hope that makes sense. So let's go and have a look at how I'm doing it. So if I bring my flight simulator in and X's and O's and put my camera up here so you can actually see what I'm pressing. That should work. And in fact, if I make this come to the front, I've got a bit more screen real estate to work with. That's pretty good. Okay, so we're starting with a pretty empty template again. I've got my throttle and mixture assigned, so I can easily restart the engine if I need to keep the alternator running. So what I need to do is to create a way of knowing whether I want to control my megahertz or my kilohertz, and that means I have to actually create my own local variable to do that. Let's have a look at this. Is where now I actually need to unclick that, and so I've got full control of the screen. Here we go. This is the SDK documentation. It's very dense stuff. It's like the old joke, I know what every single word means, but I can't understand the entire sentence. I don't know how a lot of it works, but reverse Polish notation is what this is about. And it's got here in that section what each of the different variables do, the A's, the B's, the F's, the H. And the one we're after is the LVARs, the local variables. And a lot of them are defined. When they create an aircraft, they create local variables, and they're persistent and they last forever. But we can retrieve or create a user-defined local variable, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a local variable. Now, we don't have to do anything clever like you do in some languages, declare them beforehand. As soon as you access it, if you define it, if it's been accessed, referenced in any way, it creates it and it sets it to 0 by default. If you don't want it to be 0, you can go into the files and create one and give it a default value. If you want a default value for it, you can go into the flight file and edit it, or if you want to be persistent so that when you leave an aircraft and come back to it later, and start a flight later on, it will remember where you left a switch or something like that. You can go in and edit this, and I'm not going to do that. I don't do anything that's destructive. Everything I'm doing here today doesn't go into the files, it doesn't create anything, it's all temporary, and when you restart next time it will have done nothing. Nothing's happened. So let's park that right out of the way and back where we were. Okay, so all we need to do is reference this variable, and it appears, it's created automatically. So let's do some scripting. So all my scripts for this are going in my Honeycomb script area, my HC scripts, and I'm going to start all my scripts also called HC, so I know which one it is. And what we want to do is to use a variable and to toggle it between megahertz and kilohertz. To make sure my name doesn't of my variable of my script doesn't clash, I start it with HC in case there's another script around. This is going to be to toggle the nav. We're going to work with the nav radio, and I'm toggling the kilohertz. Why I'm aiming at the kilohertz because when we start the variable, it'll be 0, so that'll be saying that it's false that it's in kilohertz mode. Therefore, by default, it's in megahertz mode. And when I'm doing my frequencies, I do the megahertz and then I do the kilohertz. So I want it to start in megahertz mode, but the kilohertz, I'm going to create a variable called kilohertz, and it will be given a 0 by default. Okay, so firstly, I'm going to read or try and read the variable, but of course it's not there, so it will be created by doing this, but later on it will read it. And we just call it L, and again, to make sure it doesn't clash with any other variable that might exist, if I put my on the front of it, it just defines it as my variable, just in case there is another one around. So my nav kilohertz. Now we've got to make sure we're absolutely consistent with capitalization. If we use it later on and we get it wrong, it will create another variable, so it won't be the same variable. Be careful with that. Okay, so we want to look at it and find out if it's 0. Of course it will be 0 by default, but if it is 0 and I allocate this to a button, I want to press that button and I want to change it from 0 to 1 and back again. That's the toggling bit. So we are going to do a comparison to find out if it's 0, and if it is 0, which of course it will be first time, I want you to send a 1 to my L bar, and it's my nav kilohertz. Checking absolutely sure that they are identical and they look it to me. Okay, so we are going to send a 1 to there. Okay, so if not, if that was 1, we want to send the opposite, to send a 0. So the else comes in. Notice there's no E on the end of else. That means we're going to send a 0 to, and this arrow I'm putting in, it's the greater than sign, but it's not being used as a greater than. Which is being used as a send it to type command. My nav kilohertz. We've got a green light here which is suggesting that at least the syntax is correct. It may not be that my logic isn't correct, but my syntax is correct. What I'm going to do just before I commit, we will have a look at that variable and watch it happen. So we're going to watch that simulator variable. So we'll put it in here. L my nav kilohertz. Add that, and when I click on test now, if I find a place on my screen to park this, it should flick backwards and forwards. The observant of you may have noticed it came up as a 1. That's because I was doing a test run before I started recording it, and I left the variable running. It was still there from where I left it last time, because I didn't restart the flight, which is a bit naughty. I should have done, but there we are. What I want to make sure is it's toggling. It's toggling, okay. So I can now save that. So we've got that script there, and in fact, while we're here, if I put that away, but we'll leave that out, I'm going to allocate that to the button that I want here. That's the one I want to do the toggling. So we can allocate that straight away. So it is in my H scripts area, and it is my toggle nav kilohertz. Press the button to allocate it, and click on add, and that should be there now. So when I press my button, you see it going from 1 to 0. So without a doubt, that's working. So now I'm going to write a script so that when I turn this anti-clockwise, it decreases the frequency, and it will decrease either the megahertz or the kilohertz depending on the variable, the one that I put in that suggests whether it's megahertz or kilohertz. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. So it's going to go into my H scripts area, and it's going to be called HC, and it's my nav radio decreasing, and that's it. That's all we need to put in for the name. We find out whether it's in megahertz or kilohertz mode by looking at that local variable. So it's my nav kilohertz. So we look at that and we check it. It doesn't really matter which way around we check it, but I'm going to check to see if it says 0. If it's in 0, that means it's in the megahertz mode, which would be the large knob on the outside. And if you saw my previous video, let's do the comparison. Is it equal? And if it is, if you saw my previous video, you saw that I could actually just put that in as an event because I was assigning it over here directly to a knob, but I'm not doing that here. I'm putting it into a script. And if I go and try to insert my sim event using a filter, you'll find that you won't find it. It's not there, which is very weird. Okay, so what we're going to have to do is to insert a sim variable. So let's filter it down and we'll find that nav out there, and here's the large decrease for the nav. Double click and put that in, and it straight away puts in the form of writing to the variable, and it looks like it's going to send a 1 to it. In fact, that number is redundant. It could be taken out and it would still work. But it's a strange little quirk that you've got to live with. The else command, of course, that we need to put in is if it's not in 0 mode, it must be in 1 mode, which means it's in kilohertz. So we're going to insert the small button, the small knob. Oops, and it's not a sim event. It's a sim variable like before. HTML, and it's the small one, but it's still the decrease that we're putting into there, and we'll now save that script. Now what we'll do is we'll allocate that. So it's in my HC scripts, and it is my nav decrease. And what we'll do is we'll allocate it to the control by turning it twice so it knows it's turn left. Okay, job done. So now if we look, we should see as I turn that left, it's doing the megahertz. If I press on here to toggle, it's now doing the kilohertz. Press to toggle again, we're back to megahertz. Okay, so that's working absolutely fine. We can control that. We need to do the increment, the increase one. So we're going to write another script for that. We don't need to actually write the script. What we need to do is to edit the one that we had before, which was decrease, and make it increase. So it's still the nav radio, but we'll rename it increase. And all we need to do is to change where it says decrease, change it to increase. The logic behind it is absolutely the same, just we want it to do an increase. And we save that as a new one. We're not going to update the old one. We've got it, given it a new name, so we'll save it as if it was new. And then we just go and watch it happen. So again, if I turn to the right, oh, we need to allocate it to the button. Whoops, allocate it first of all. Okay, so the script is in the same place, but it's the increase, the nav increase. 2 turns to allocate it. Done. And now if I turn it, I'm increasing and decreasing the megahertz. Click to toggle, and I'm doing the increase and decrease on the kilohertz. So that's job done. What I want to do now is to allocate onto here the active and standby swap, and on here the swap between nav radio 1, nav radio 2, and those are direct. There's no script involved in those. I can pick those straight out of here. And it's the PFD and it's the nav, and the first one is the one to switch between active and standby, so that'd be the switch button, and that'll be the top one here. So we'll click on there and add, and if we test that, we should see that cursor move, sorry, left to right. You should see what the 00 and the 05 versions swapping, so they're working okay. No reason why they shouldn't. And the last one now is the nav push, as if we'd pushed the end of the button. So nav push, which is the one that will change it between nav radio 1 and nav radio 2. So allocate that there, click on add, and we'll just check that the cursor jumps between the two. And then when we're in radio 2, we still have kilohertz and megahertz working. So we've achieved what we want to do for the nav. Much quicker once you go to do the comms. Again, a bit of editing will get us there. But what I would like to do now is to go and control the LEDs around here. I'd like them to be all off when I'm in megahertz mode and all on when I'm in kilohertz mode, so I can see what's going on. I've got no other indicator otherwise, whether it's in megahertz or kilohertz. So we need to look in a couple of places to get the information for that. The first place we need to look, if we just shift that to the back and bring this in, this is the manual. If I can move it, there we are. This is the manual that comes with, let's get rid of some things there we go. You can download, this is the manual you can download for the Behringer. What it's telling you here is if I want to change the LED ring behavior, and I can change it between having a single segment of a LED turn on, or a pan, a fan, a spread, all sorts of different patterns of lights. I use CC1, and I know I need my camera back again. If I use CC1, it encodes rotary 1, CC2, CC3, CC4. The CC is the control change. We're changing the controller. So it's 1 to 8 for changing the behavior. If I want to change which LEDs are on, I send it to this 9, 10, 11 as my destination. So CC9 would be talking to this one. If I send a 0 to it, it turns all the LEDs off. And then the one I'm interested in is sending them all a 27 so that they all come on. So that's the first piece of information we need. The second one is from Lorby's instructions on page 118. Again, not sure I understand everything you can do with the instructions that you get there, but this one here, this is where we want to concentrate. That's the template for what we send, and that 0 for all off or 27 for all on is actually a velocity in musical MIDI terms. So we're going to send either a 0 or 1 across the MIDI to whichever device we're talking to. Mine happens to be device 7, and I'll show you in a second how you work out which is yours. The action, and we used note on in the previous video to turn an LED on or off, but if you remember on the instructions on the X-touch, it said that you need to send a CC, a controlled change, and that's what we're going to do here. We're going to send a CC as an action. It's always over channel 1. We talk over channel 1. Everything on your MIDI chain will hear it, but it will only action if you've got the right device ID. And this is where we change which of the controllers we are sending to, and we want to send to number 9 in that respect. Okay, let's see it in action. It'll make more sense when we actually see it working. Let's put that back where it should be. Let's make sure it's sitting at the front. Okay, so in my script here, I already have an LED script, and we can just keep adding to the LED script. In fact, this one here is going to be a bit of a weird one because we haven't actually got that working anymore. I'll probably take it out, but when I run the script, you'll probably see this light come on because the button layer is 0, and so it's going to switch the light on. But anyway, it's a nice test of our script is working, and then we can delete it. So we can work on this. As before, we need to know what our variable is up to, the one we created ages ago. My nav kilohertz, and we want to know, are you 0? Because if you are, we're going to make sure the LEDs are turned off. So my curly brackets in, and what that means is we're going to send a 0 via MIDI, so output to MIDI device number 7. And I said I'll show you where you find out your devices, and they are here in your hardware. Show MIDI devices, and you can see that my MIDI out, it says go out on number 7 to get to the X-touch Mini. When it comes in, it's going to come in on 2, but it's going to go out on 7. Yeah, MIDI's fun. No idea. Anyway, we are going to send not a note on this time. We're sending that control change CC. It still goes over channel 1, but this time it's going to device number 9. That's the destination for it. If it's not 0, it's a 1, so we've got to turn it on. I want to turn them all on, so I'm going to put 27 in there. So else send a 27 across MIDI and everything else is the same. Device 7, and we're sending a program change, control change, channel 1, device number 9. Okay, so that's what we're sending, and we can update that because we're just updating that script. To make it work, we are going to have it automated for this aircraft so that it runs all the time in the background. So from there, I'm going to have my LED script repeating every 100 milliseconds. Add that, and as I said, this has come on. So now when I press this button here, it should light all the lights up, and it does. And if I go back to being in megahertz mode, it's off. So that should now be doing the megahertz, and it is doing the megahertz. So I press that now, all the lights come on, and I'm doing kilohertz. So that's it really for getting that one working. If I wanted to do the same now for my for the comms radio, it's a bit of an edit job. I've already got my nav decrease, so I do be consistent. My comms decrease, com. This should here be com, and we save this as a new script. It's my comms decrease that hasn't existed before, and I will do the increase version. and save that as new. I need to be able to toggle a COM variable that doesn't exist at the moment, but it will do in a second. So we're now creating the COM variable. And as long as I've got all my capitalization right, always fun. Save as new. Now we need to allocate some buttons to it. So that's going to come from my scripts. This is my COM decrease, so it's the second one across, turned anti-clockwise. My increase one, turn it clockwise. The toggle, so we can switch between megahertz and kilohertz. That's now allocated, and I need to straight away go for my comms one. So that's my comms switch between 1 and 2. No, switch between standby and active, which is this one here, and the 1-2 switch. So this is the push button, which switches me between 1 and 2, which is that one there. Right, that's a lot done without testing it. So if we look here on the comms radio, we'll see if we're getting it right. So the comms is going up and down. Switch it into kilohertz mode. That's working fine. Standby to active. Yep, that's working. And switch between 1 and 2. All working fine. Just the LED scripts to go now. So scripts, my scripts. Sorry, not my scripts. HC script, that's what I want. So I'm going for HC LED. That line there, copied, pasted in, and gone. And this should be 10. And this should be 10. And we'll do an update on that. And we can see straight away the LEDs are lit up. I press it again, they will go off. So independently I'm changing the 2 channels now. I can see that button wasn't quite so dodgy. It gives me a heart attack every time. There it is. This one here hasn't hardly been used. It works beautifully. Okay, so that's it. We've now got megahertz, kilohertz independently on each of those. You can see how I could now go and get on and do the inner and outer of the PFD. And they'll probably appear in another script. Now I'm not going to spend my time, your time, watching me do that programming. I hope you've got the concepts how that works. It's about creating an individual variable for each of the groups that you want to control. Okay, if that works, hopefully I will see you in the next video. Probably a couple of weeks away. We've got a bit of holiday coming up now. Okay, thanks a lot for watching. Feedback's always welcome. Tell me how I'm doing, and subscribing and liking. It helps bring it up to the attention of other people if they're searching for this kind of material. The algorithm works and pulls it up, makes it more obvious to them. But that's it. Okay, thanks for that.